Hello everybody and welcome back to another programming tutorial. Today we are going to talk about modules and functions, and we're going to do it through a problem and what we want to solve here. So on the screen here I have a quick problem that I want to be able to write the pseudocode for, flowchart, and we will program all very quickly here and show you the differences between a module and a function. So we're going to write the pseudocode for a module named netPay. The module will accept three parameters by value. The parameters are all real numbers representing hourly pay rate, number of hours worked, and tax rate. The module will calculate gross pay by multiplying the hour pay rate by the number of hours worked. It will then calculate the deductions by multiplying the gross pay by the tax rate. Finally, calculate the net pay by subtracting the deductions from the gross pay, and it will display the next pay. So we are going to call this a module and not necessarily a function just yet, simply because it's not going to give us any information back. It's going to display something for us, it's going to do something for us, but it's not going to give us information back to the part of the program that is calling it. So anytime you're writing a function, you're writing a segment of code that can be executed as many times as you may need with as many different parameters as you want to plug into it, or I should say different values for the parameters that you want to plug into it, and it will produce the results. But there are differences between modules and functions in the way that they are called and how they're used. So for this instance, we'll do a module or a non-return, or what we would call a void function. Okay. So for a module, we're going to give it the name module. Okay. We will call it netPay. Okay. And here in the parentheses, when we're defining a function header, we're always going to put a set of parentheses there to define that it is a function header, and that we will place in here the information that needs to get passed into this function. So here we want to pass in all real numbers that represent the pay rate. We need to have a real number that represents the hours worked, and a real number that represents the tax rate. Okay. And once we have that, realistically this is like a small little mini program. Okay. Think about your IPO process for the most part, and your declarations, and just make sure it's just one task for one module, so it does one thing really well, and in our case it's going to calculate the net pay given these parameters. We can still have declarations. Okay, we are going to declare real numbers for the gross pay. We're going to declare a real number for the deductions and a real number for the net pay. And then we can go through our IPO process. Now, in this particular module, there is no input. All the input is actually coming in via parameter, so we're not going to gather input from the user. So we can actually go right down to the processing section, and we can start doing our process. Our process would be to set the gross pay, okay, equal to, what is it, the hours worked times the pay rate, or we'll say pay rate times hours worked. We're going to set the deductions equal to the gross pay times our tax rate, and we're assuming that's coming in as a decimal version of the percentage. And then we're going to finally set the net pay equal to my gross pay minus the deductions. Right. And we're going to do the output section of the IPO process, and that is to display net pay. So it's a pretty simple module, and the only way that this changes if it was a function, let's say we wanted this in a functional form where it doesn't display the net pay, but as a function it returns the net pay, and we'll see how that gets changed when we call it. We would just change that up very easily. We're going to write, instead of module net pay, we'll write a function for net pay, and we're going to do the exact same logic. We're just simply going to change the display to a return statement. So I might write something like this: function, and here I need to define what it's going to return. This is going to return a real number, and I would still say net pay, right? And I would still have the exact same stuff: real pay rate, real for the hours worked, and a real for the tax rate. And to be perfectly honest with you, all of this is going to be identical. Okay, nothing really changes in terms of it being a function versus a module. The only thing that's going to change is instead of output, we're going to have what we call a return statement, and we're going to return net pay. And that just tells us that we're going to get that mountain back from where it's being called. So there's the only differences between a module and a function. A module will do work, okay, and simplify the process and abstract your overall program, whereas a function will do all those things plus return something back to you. Now, you could say that since this does more than a module does, why not just use functions for everything? Well, modules serve their purpose. Sometimes you just have a lot of stuff you want to display to the user, or you just want to gather input and set a bunch of global variables, or whatever it may be. Your module's perfect for that. Sometimes the abstractions you're going to come up with, they don't need to give information back to the user or back to the computer, the program in which it's being called from. So a module is the way to go. So you will find opportunities for both. They just set up a little bit differently. So let's come over here and let's flowchart that logic real quick. We're still going to use this exact same symbol. So we're going to use a start symbol, but instead of our start, we're going to name the module. So we're going to go module net pay. And we will plug in all the things that we said we were going to plug in. Real for the hours worked. A real for our pay rate, which I believe I'm doing this backwards now, so we want to be careful. So we'll just grab this and we'll copy and paste and make this a little bit easier on ourselves. So boom, there it is. Whoop, that went small. Too big to get this figured out later. Okay. So we've got that in there, okay? Now I just want to make sure I come through with my declarations. So we'll come and connect these. We're going to declare real for the gross pay, real for the deductions, a real for the net pay. And we're going to go through our processing. So let's do that. We're going to come in here and we want another rectangle, right? So we're going to set gross pay equal to hours, or sorry, pay rate times hours worked. Okay. And again, we could make that pretty. Bring it back. We want to come up with a new shape here, another rectangle, and we want to set deductions equal to gross pay times the tax rate. And we'll do it again, where we're going to do net pay. Yes, set net pay equal to gross pay minus the deductions. All right. And now when it comes to a flowchart, here is really the only difference, the big difference between a flowchart and pseudocode is in this last terminal symbol, okay? In the, we had one more thing to do in the module. We have to display our net pay, so let's bring that in. Okay. And in a module, what we're going to see is that this is just going to have a return. It's not going to return anything, it's just going to have a return. Because again, we have to remember that our program is calling this, and it's going to use it somewhere, somehow in our program. And we'll start to decipher what that program looks like in a second, but this is essentially what we have here, okay? So we'll write a program to kind of go with this in the next segment here. So, but here is your module. Now, to simplify this and show you what it looks like in terms of a function, it is essentially the exact same idea. The only thing that changes is obviously this word module is going to change to the word function. We're also going to declare what type of information it's going to return. It's going to return something of type real. And obviously this is going to go away. Okay, and what we're going to have here is instead of a blank return statement, we would have a return statement that returned the value we were looking for. So there is the subtle difference between a module and a function. It is just simply a way to show it off a little bit differently, okay, just to show it to you side by side. So there you go. Here's your module, comes through, does everything it's supposed to do, but it displays the net pay and returns nothing, okay, but just returns back to the flow of the program in which it was called. A function has the function header in here displaying what type of data it's going to return to us, and we are simply going to make sure that we return not only to the flow of the program, but also all the way back with the net pay, okay? So let's go and code this real quick in Python, okay? Now in Python, coding a module and a function, there is zero difference between the two, okay? The only difference between the two is that a module will not have a return statement, whereas a function will, okay? So to define this function, we're going to write the keyword def for definition, and then we're going to give it a name, net pay, okay? We are still going to provide it with the parameters, but we do not have to necessarily declare a data type for those. So we will say hours worked, pay rate, let's do that first. Hours worked, and the tax rate. Okay. Once we have that, we end our function heading with a colon, much like we would with an if statement or elif or else or while loop or for loop. But we do have that colon there, and then you'll see that it automatically kind of indents for you because now you're in the block of code that you want to do. Just like with a Python program, we don't actually make declarations, we just do the work that we need to do, and variables are declared as they're initialized. So we can start doing that, but it's always a good idea to include a doc string, which is a triple quoted string, and it will be the first line of code inside any function, and all it does is it describes the function. This will calculate and display / return the net pay, okay? And we'll close that with 3 quotes, okay? So it doesn't go in a print statement or anything like that. It's just simply in a triple quoted string, and it's the first line of code inside there, and it just simply tells us what we're doing. And now we can start getting into the function and doing what we want to do. So here we would do gross pay equals our pay rate times the hours worked. We do our deductions equals our gross pay times the tax rate, okay? And then finally we would put together our net pay equals our gross pay minus our deductions, okay? And we would display or print the net pay. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and run this and just see what happens. So I'm going to save it. Okay, I ran it and nothing happened. And the reason nothing happened is because writing a function or a module is it's just not enough. You wrote this chunk of code, but you still need to use it somehow. So when we go back and start talking about how we're going to build these programs and things like that, having a function is simply just not enough. You have to be able to use it. Now, this week I want you to focus in on just writing functions for the most part. I will give you the code that will run them for the most part, but you should talk about how they're going to get run. So usually you have another function, okay, or a module, I should say, called main. That is usually the driving program for your code, whatever it may be. And in that main function is where you would put everything that you need to do. So in our case, main would be something like this. We would display maybe this is a payroll program, and then we might get some input, or we'll make our declarations. Let's just do that first, actually. So in our main module, we would have our declarations. And in here, we would declare our hours worked. So a real for hours worked, or pay rate. Let's do that first. Real for hours worked. Oops. a real for tax rate. Okay, and then we might input all three of these things: pay rate. We might input the hours worked, and we might input the tax rate. Okay. And then what we will do for our processing is we might make a call, okay, and this is a keyword that you have to use, call, and we might call net pay. And notice that in the way that I'm doing it, I'm calling it and I'm going to pass in the pay rate, I'm going to pass in the hours worked, and I'm going to pass in the tax rate. Now there is no reason that these have to be the same name as the parameters above. They can be anything we want. We could even hard code those values in there if we really wanted. Maybe inputting the tax rate isn't something we want to do. So actually let's take that out and we will just input a constant for the tax rate. Maybe something like a 0.035, so a 3.5%, okay? Something of that nature. So there's different ways to go about it and lots of different ways to do this. And so if I just call net pay, then I have my module name, and then all I have to do is make sure that I call main in my program, and that will allow me to actually execute everything I need to do. So, and we can do that exact same thing in a flowchart form. So we can say something like start or main. Usually I just use start to represent the main for the program. And then here I would have my declarations. A real for pay rate, a real for hours worked. Okay, and we're not going to input tax rate because that's just something we're going to put in ourselves, something hard coded. We're going to input these things. Input hours worked. Okay. Line that all up. And we are going to make a call. Now, to make a call in flowchart form, we're going to use a different symbol. We're going to use this predefined process symbol. And that's where we call net pay. Now, for whatever reason, draw.io does not like to put that right in the center, so we can change that for ourselves by going to text and making sure the position is in the center. Okay, and that should put it right there where we want it. Okay, and then finally, we can stop our process. Okay. Connect all these with flow lines, and we have a working flowchart. Okay, and again, I'm calling just the module for now, but the same exact process happens for basically for the function. We'll show you how that changes up. But here, let's get in that. We'll go def main, okay, and we will throw it all together. So here is the main module program, okay, and we will input our hours worked or our pay rate. We will input the hours worked. And then we can make a call to our net pay. So we would just simply say net pay, and that's it. And that's our entire program. Now, still, if I run this, nothing happens. For the same reason that nothing happened when this worked, is for the same reason nothing would happen when here for this, because we still haven't called this function. So that's usually the very last line of anything we do, is we make a call to main, okay? And now I can run this, and we'll see what happens. Whoop. And I have a mistake here. Hopefully you picked up on it. So let's type in 30 and 25, okay? And it says it's missing 3 required positional arguments. So we need to provide it with the information it needs. So remember, net pay needed 3 pieces of information. I supplied it with none. I need to supply it with something. So I need to pass it pay rate, the hours worked, and the tax rate. Now the one thing you got to be mindful of is parameter passing happens in order. So the first argument goes to the first parameter, the second argument to the second parameter, the third argument to the third parameter. And here I don't have tax rate. We said we were going to hard code it to a 0.35, okay, 3.5%. And now if I run this, it should work just fine. So if I enter the pay rate, let's say we were making $25 an hour, and I worked 40 hours that week, I made $965. Okay? So that's essentially how we can work with that. Had this been a function, instead of printing the pay rate, we returned the pay rate, or the net pay, we have to use this function a little bit differently. Okay? I would have to say something like net pay equals, okay, or my pay equals. I don't like using the same variable name as my function name. Sometimes it gets a little confusing. So I might say something like pay equals that, and then I can go and print something. But right now, since nothing is displayed, I'm not going to see it. But I could say something like my wages or something like that. Print this week. So we might throw it in and say this dot format pay. And now if I run it, you'll see the same sort of thing happen. Let's say we were making $20 an hour, we worked 50 hours that week, so there we got $965 again. Right? That doesn't make sense. Oh, with the taxes and everything, it makes sense. Okay, so there you go. There's two different ways to do sort of the same problem. Now, obviously, there's a lot to it where you have to manipulate it, but just think about these things as their own little individual programs. These programs can either do stuff for you and print stuff out, or they can do stuff for you and give you stuff back. But it all comes down to how you use it. Make sure that when you use them appropriately. If it's a return function, you need to use it in the sense that allows it to get returned value caught into something. So here we use it in an assignment statement. We could have easily have completely commented this out or not used it at all and typed my net pay function in here. And I could have said pay rate, hours worked, and we could say 0.035. Right? And it would do the exact same thing. You just have to make sure that you call return functions in a place that makes sense. Now here I need one extra parenthesis because I opened up a new one. And I could type in $22 and $40, 40 hours a week, and $849.20. So again, this is going to take a little bit of practice, but I think if you look over the notes that I've provided you with, as well as this little tutorial, you'll find out that writing your own modules and functions can be relatively simple because you just think about them as their own little mini program. The trick is just making sure that you use those little mini programs as you go. So keep in mind it'll take some time, but you will all get there in due time. So if you've got questions, feel free to reach out and ask, and I will be happy to